Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by
the Bartlett Area Chamber of Commerce and its member Renaissance Bank, committed to supporting the growth of businesses in the greater Memphis area. Community banking with local expedited decision-making. Details at renaissancebank.com. Renaissance Bank, member FDIC.
the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Tonight on Behind the Headlines, the new leader of Shelby Farms on the massive changes at the park. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I'm joined tonight by Jen Andrews, recently named Executive Director at the Shelby Farms Conservancy. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Along with Bill Dries, Senior Reporter with the Memphis Daily News. I guess first, congratulations.
Thank you.
They did a national search, and as I think it was Tom Grimes, I believe, the head of the board said, we found that our future leader was inside. You have been at the Conservancy, I think, from the founding. Is that correct?
That's right. I was the first employee hired, actually. So I'm coming up on 10 years, June 1st.
So we'll talk a little bit more about your background later in the show, but just from the outset, there's so much going on out there. Your priorities right now as you go into this job?
Well, right now, at the moment, sort of short term, my priorities are to get the business ready for the opening of Heart of the Park, to make sure that we deliver the construction project on time and on budget, to make sure that we've got great business plans for the new event center and rentals program, to make sure my staff is happy and productive and feeling great about everything, to make sure our grand opening events go off without a hitch. So we've got some kind of 6-month goals that are heating up right now because construction is almost finished.
And we'll take a look at some of the renderings of some of the changes that are happening there and walk through them. Why don't we do it that way? Some of the big changes that are happening, and we maybe start with the lake and some of the physical structures that are going on, and people can see the renderings of them as you talk.
Yep, so the project is centered around the expansion of Patriot Lake, which was an existing and well-loved but ecologically damaged lake. So we've expanded it to about twice its former size, and we've created an ecologically sustainable lake. We've increased the watershed, we've shored up the edges, we've done a lot of work on the ecology of the lake. Around the lake, there are a series of facilities designed to be sort of an active hub of the park. So there's a new visitor center, similar to the location the old visitor center was in. There's a water playground, kind of themed and designed in the same way as our innovative Woodland Discovery Playground, but with some water squirt features for kids. Boat rental, bike rental, and there's a new event center and restaurant on the east end of the lake. That's 2 buildings under one roof. Restaurant is something that we heard in the public input phase a lot that people were interested in. People wanted to be able to come to the park and eat. And the event center is in that same facility, and that's where people have weddings, corporate retreats, meetings, things like that.
Yeah, and so it's a massive undertaking, and it will all open on time when?
Late summer, early fall.
Okay.
Yeah, we're ahead of schedule right now.
That's good.
But don't jinx us.
I won't. Bill.
And when the park, well, we should point out, the park remains open at this point.
Right.
And it's a very busy place as all of this construction is taking place. When these improvements are all done, what do you think the mission of the park will become at that point? How will we use it differently than we're using it now?
Well, Bill, you probably remember from the public input process years ago, I know I remember seeing you there, when we were selecting between the 3 designs, the 3 master planners that we could choose from. And there were some really innovative, interesting designs, but the public overwhelmingly chose James Corner Field Operations, and they were our favorite too. And part of the reason was because they didn't try to come in and totally transform the park and fill it up with lots of things. They really respected what was special about the park already. Its scale, its location, its ability to transform the city in more ways than just being a giant park. So the idea was to build this iconic hub in the center. This is a place that all the people come to and disperse out from. The project is about giving the park the facilities that it needs to be a world-class park. The park has the potential to be that. There is no other park like this in the world, especially with being geographically located in the center of our region, the size and scale, the ability to do so many different activities in one park, which is very rare, large-scale activities like equestrian activities and the outdoor off-leash dog park, but also community-driven, kind of active, more urban activities like concerts and gatherings and places for people to come together and sort of celebrate urban life while there's still room in the park for people to escape from urban life. So I think the new facilities become sort of the platform to put the park on the map as being a truly world-class park.
Right, and the park, up to the time that this started, was being used in many of these ways already. So the issue was becoming the park in its current incarnation was really going to be overwhelmed by these uses as more time went on.
That's right. Overwhelmed by the uses, but also suffering from a lack of a plan. If you don't have a plan, especially for a large park, it's way too tempting to fill it up with things. And that was part of our case that we made to put together the public-private partnership to manage the park. A lot of the thinking behind that was that we really need a plan to guide us for the future of Shelby Farms Park. What will the community need out of the park in 50 years, not just next year? So we really try to make those 50 and 100-year decisions about what happens in the park. We knew that the park was becoming more and more popular. More and more people are coming, and they're coming for different reasons. One of the special things about being able to say our vision is the next great 21st century park, is that a 21st century park should respond to specific 21st century needs that a community has. And I think putting together the master plans allowed us to anticipate a lot of that and plan for it.
And you talk about 50 years, it's also some $52 million worth of improvements. I mean, almost all of that is private money, correct?
That's right. It's actually $70 million worth of improvements total. Heart of the park is $52 million. The $70 million includes the Woodland Discovery Playground, which we opened in 2011, the Shelby Farms Green Line, and the Wolf River Pedestrian Bridge, which we opened in 2010.
Yeah.
And the large signs that you now see, the big totem identity signs at park entrances that sort of give the park a similar brand language across the space. And most of that was private.
Yeah.
We got $5 million from the state of Tennessee. We got $3 million from Shelby County and $150,000 from the city of Memphis.
Yeah.
Everything else was private.
And you were in part, that was your job prior to taking this job. So you were, if someone wonders if you're prepared for all the financing side and so on, you've been in the heart of that since since you got there.
That's right. I started in public engagement and input. That was my first role, and moved into communications and then into development fundraising.
We talked and we showed pictures of the cool buildings that are going up, but there are a lot of, it is still a park and it's a big park. There are changes to trails, there are trees. Talk about some of the not the bright shiny objects, but just the kind of natural changes that are happening now in trails and woodland and so on.
Yeah, and to that point, just back to the bright shiny objects, we really thought about that a lot. We wanted an architect, if you're putting buildings in a park, which is not our first priority in managing parkland, but there needed to be some facilities. We wanted an architect who understood that the landscape is the star, the park, the natural resources are the stars, the lake is the star. The buildings should be interesting and sculptural and unique, but they need to look like they belong. They don't need to stick out like a sore thumb. And so we fortunately were able to find an architect, Marlon Blackwell, out of Fayetteville, Arkansas, who did just that for us. And to that point, people get very excited about the water playground and the new restaurant and all of these things that are coming. But the heart of this project was about restoring ecological health to the core of the park. Bill and I were talking before, Patriot Lake has for a long time been an unhealthy lake that seeped from the bottom, water evaporated from the top. We have to pump to keep it full. The shores are badly eroded. The watershed didn't work. So, really the heart of this story is ecological restoration. We're planting 3,000 trees around heart of the park, acres of new conservation lawn and meadows.
Yeah.
Really the ecology is at the center of what we do.
Did you get pushback on just the, changing the landscape? I mean, you had to be some amount of pushback on that, even though, as you're saying, if the old Patriot Lake was unsustainable and not ecologically sound, there had to be certain people say, hey, we have no business making changes to that.
Well,
Maybe we just need to improve some things.
But Patriot Lake was also a man-made lake,
That's
and
right.
a lot
Yeah,
of people
right.
don't realize.
Right.
Yeah, it was dug in the early 90s when the county needed dirt to cap a landfill.
Right.
That's across
right.
the street.
But one person's ditch is another person's perfect pond. You know, I mean, there had to be some of that through the
Sure.
process. Yeah.
You know, maybe early on when we were first putting together the nonprofit, I wouldn't call it pushback, but we got a lot of questions, and I thought they
Yeah.
were good questions. For a long time, people who love Shelby Farms in Memphis had to fight
Right.
to protect it. And so putting together the conservation easement and the master plan and the nonprofit management was all about shifting from the fight to
Right.
protecting the park with the conservation easement and then talking about possibilities.
Yeah.
So I thought it was completely fair that there were people at the beginning who said, is the park going to be protected? Are you going to change something that I love?
Yeah.
You know, people tend to like progress, but you tend not to like change. So I thought it was our responsibility to kind of get them there. Once we built the green line and the playground and the bridge, I think that we proved that we could raise money and that we could put out we could design at a really high level. We could do something innovative and different. We could put out a plan and raise the money and get it done quickly and deliver it to the public, so these weren't pipe dreams, and that we were doing it in an ecologically sensitive way. So by the time Heart of the Park came, I think people were really just excited
Built that
about what it
trust.
was going to mean.
Right. Well, you mentioned the Green Line. Talk about the expansion of the Green Line. Right. What's going on with the Green Line right now? It's crossing Germantown Parkway,
That's
and
right.
talk about how the Green Line connects to what's going on.
Right, so the current section of the Green Line is 6.5 miles from Midtown Memphis around Tillman and Walnut Grove out to the park. And the county was able to acquire right-of-way for an additional 4.5 miles that's under construction right now. Actually also for an additional 2 miles east of that that isn't under construction yet. But right now that 4.5 miles east of the trailhead at Farm Road in the park is under construction now.
Okay. Bill.
We've talked about the impact on the park. Let's talk for a second about the influence of the park on what happens around the park, specifically on the northern border.
Yeah.
By the time this show airs, the City Council will probably have voted on the park side at Shelby Farms Park development, which is a set of 3 apartment buildings on the Green Line that are 6 stories according to the developer's plans. Where is the Conservancy on that? How does the Conservancy feel about that project?
So, you know, our responsibility is to the park, and the land that we manage is the park land, the publicly owned park land. The piece of property that we're talking about, the proposed parkside development, is on private land, but it's right across the street from the park. So while it's not our job to design what the outside edges of the park look like, we're certainly interested in it. And again, taking that 50-year look, 20-year, 50-year, 100-year look, we think that the park has a great potential to positively impact the communities around it. And I mean the communities immediately surrounding it and also the community at large. We think that great parks like Central Park and Golden Gate Park and Hyde Park are positive contributors to their communities in more ways than just providing trails and lakes and trees. So we think that smart and positive and high quality development could be good for the park and good for the community and could fit within our mission in terms of being in support. But we think that bad development could have just as much of a negative impact as good development could in the opposite.
I'm going to, not to put you on the spot, but I'll put
Sure.
you on the spot. Does this look to you like good development or bad development?
I think it has the potential to be good development, but I'm not certain yet.
Yeah.
You know, we're monitoring it closely. I'm also not in the apartment business, you know, so I
Right.
don't, we've got experts that we've hired that are vetting these plans for us, and so we're watching it closely. It's not our responsibility to say, yes, this gets built, or no, this doesn't get built. We hope that if
But you're
we
an
do have
important
some...
neighbor in the neighborhood.
We have credibility and influence, I think,
Yeah.
and I've been in close contact with the park neighbors who are
Some of them are
against the
very
project.
opposed, yes, right.
I met with the developers this week, so I've been talking with them too. We asked Land Use Control Board when they approved, when they gave the original approval a few weeks ago, we asked them to include a condition that we would have a review and approval of the final plans.
Yeah. Did they grant that?
Yes.
They did. And some of this is inevitable, I assume. You know, I mean, it is a function of the popularity of the park that
Right.
a developer says, look, I can sell out those apartments because I'm going to get all these young people or old people
Right.
who want to be near the park, and it's right across, and it's a great amenity. So some of it is
Sure.
a reflection of the fact that the park is growing and more successful and so on.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And we want the edges of the park to be vibrant and high
Yeah.
quality. And I love the idea that more people could have access to the park by living
Right.
really close to it. I think it could be amazing to
Right.
live in a high quality apartment building right across from the Green Line. I think that would be really neat.
About 10 minutes left. Speaking of access, the road. What is the status? That has been a huge issue forever, as long as I've lived in Memphis, 20 years, of what's going to happen. You know, there's the proposals to widen, and there were the don't widen the Shelby Farms, and there was all that in the past. But there was most recently, and I think it was the last time that your predecessor was on the show, we talked about the interchange and the rerouting of traffic. Where does
Right.
all that stand?
Well, we worked for a long time. The road alignment was approved and accepted before the Conservancy officially took over the park. It was part of our conditions, part of our master plan. We worked for a long time to make sure that that design was a good design and that it had benefits to the park. Because we were asked to sign off on what's called the 4F de minimis determination. So we needed to be able to honestly say, does this road have little or no impact to the park? And if it does, is that impact mitigated? And so what we were working on was how that impact could be mitigated. So my predecessor, Laura, really led the charge on this. But we all worked hard on it to make sure that it was a curvilinear parkway, that it was landscaped, that it has bike and pedestrian tunnels and bridges. So it'll actually improve circulation safety for pedestrians.
And this is Farm Road, what people know now as Farm Road, or get which road is, that's what we're talking about, right?
It would, no, it would actually be, it would be west of Farm Road.
West of Farm Road.
Yeah, on the
Okay.
western edge of the park through what used to be cotton fields that the Agri Center was
And that's the
was
parkway
farming.
you're talking about, is
Yeah,
that- is
that's
over
the
there.
parkway.
Okay.
And you can see this alignment on our website. There's
Okay.
some 3D models and video.
Okay.
So Farm Road is an internal park road. But Farm Road would just be, the southern portion of it would just be used by people coming into the park,
I got
not
it.
commuter
To
traffic.
get the traffic out.
Parkway
from
moves
the heart.
commuter traffic to the
Yeah.
west of the park and park visitors to the heart of the park.
And so will that happen? Or is it tied up with state funding and so on and so forth?
It's still on track to happen.
Okay.
I don't have an update about timing on it.
But is that on the state? Is the state set the schedule on that versus Shelby Farms Conservancy? or-
We absolutely don't set the schedule for it. It's not a park project. It's a Federal Highway Administration and TDOT project. It goes through county property. It'll become a city road. It goes through county property managed by a nonprofit. It's a complicated process, but it isn't our road. We think that the road has great benefit to the park in terms of circulation.
Okay, Bill.
So let's talk a bit here about the new entrance, because as you mentioned, Farm Road is no longer going to be a through road, which people used for a lot of years. You can't get there from here at this point now. So further east on Walnut Grove, there's going to be the new entrance to the park, one of the new entrances to the park.
Yeah, not the main entrance
Right.
though. That's an entrance. It doesn't have a traffic light, and that gives access to the restaurant and event center. So, for example, the park is closed at night, but you could come into that entrance to the restaurant and event center, which could be open at night, and the rest of the park is gated off. The main entrance would be off Farm Road still, and there would be there would also be an entrance off the Parkway, and then above where the current entrance is now, north of there, Farm Road would either go away or become a bike and pedestrian route.
Right, and a lot of people cross that from the bridge over the Wolf River from the other side of Walnut Grove, and that crossing, as I understand it, will be dramatically improving for those who are on bike or who are walking in from there.
Absolutely. One of the great benefits of the current parkway design is that it has 2 tunnels and 1 bridge for pedestrians, and it was designed so that pedestrians could navigate sort of complex series of roads that kind of divide the park up, and it stitches them back together so that bikes and pedestrians could get into and around the park without having to cross traffic. I know I hold my breath every time I cross traffic at Farm Road and Walnut Grove on my bike.
Right. When we talk about all this, we talked about the 50 and the 70 million and all these changes. How does the Conservancy stay sustainable over time? I mean, there's got to be somewhere a fear that you've built so many things and created so many projects that need tending to. You've got to raise, your annual budget going forward gets bigger and bigger with all these things. Is that continue to be philanthropic money? Do you look to the government for that? What's the answer on ongoing funding?
It's a great question, and our master plan was really centered around this too. We also have a strategic business plan that's connected to it. So right now, most of our funding is coming from philanthropy, the vast majority of our funding actually. And prior to construction, we did have some funding that came through earned revenue, and that was people who wanted to rent a picnic shelter or hold a race or an event or a festival at the park. So once Heart of the Park opens, we have our new event center, which has a lakeside ballroom that'll seat 500 people at round tables for an event, or you could have a wedding in a beautiful setting on the shore of the lake, corporate retreats, things like that. So the plan is, over time, philanthropy will always be important to the park, always. But over time, the percentage shifts so that we rely more on earned revenue while still trying to grow our philanthropy, which makes us a little bit more sustainable, I think.
There are you were, I think, the first big conservancy, Shelby Farms. There's the Wolf River Conservancy, there's the Overton Park Conservancy, which I've said before in the show that I'm on the board of. And there are talk of other conservancies, maybe a conservancy, there's talk at the fairgrounds to handle some of that land and that opportunity. Andy Cates's Mud Island proposal includes possibly a conservancy for the park there. What would you say to other people about conservancies, and is that a good model, a healthy model for Memphis and Shelby County to rely so much on conservancies to manage its outdoor spaces, when to some degree you're all going to some of the same big philanthropies and the same big corporations to fund it? I mean, is this do you see this as a good model for the region, or does it scare you a little bit?
I don't think it's the right model for absolutely everything. I don't think it solves all problems. But I think there are a lot of different kind of conservancies. Overton Park Conservancy, for example, they have a different sort of arrangement with City of Memphis than we have with Shelby County. And we have a different arrangement with Shelby County than Central Park Conservancy has with Memphis. I think what's interesting about the opportunities that are coming up for conservancies is less about the conservancy and more about the idea of partnership, the public and private partnership. Again, I don't think it can be broadly applied to all problems to solve them. I think that the public entities, the government, has responsibility for these public spaces. We've been fortunate that we have a great partnership with Shelby County. It's truly a partnership, but it should never be a shifting of ownership.
Yeah.
I don't view any of the conservancies that you named as competitors, and I don't think that they would view us that way. We're a pretty tight-knit community.
Yeah.
I think if Wolf River Conservancy succeeds at building out their greenway, that makes the park better.
Yeah, and the Overton, just not to speak for Overton Park Conservancy, but that's the way they feel. I mean, if people can bike from Overton Park to Shelby Farms and back, we're all ahead on that. Just a minute or so left, Bill.
And in fact, the Wolf River Greenway will link up with the Green Line at some point. Talk about how that works and what people can expect from that.
Yep. So the original proposal from Wolf River Conservancy had the greenway on the, let me get my direction straight, on the west side of the river.
Okay.
Connecting up to the Green Line. And they approached us about an opportunity to cross over the river and run a portion of it through the Lucius Birch Natural Area to connect up to the Green Line. So we're evaluating that. We think it could be really neat. We think it makes a lot of sense for them. The route that they were looking to do along the west side of the river is problematic for a few reasons, some engineering reasons. It's next to a lot of traffic. It wouldn't really be a great experience for pedestrians. we think a boardwalk through, a small boardwalk through the Lucius Birch Natural Area and that northern section that is fairly remote for most park visitors could be really cool. So we're working with them to see if that could be a possibility.
And the Conservancy, we should point out, manages the Green Line.
Yes.
We've been talking about a Green Line that basically goes outside of the park as well
Right.
as through the park. The Conservancy's role is to manage that Green Line.
That's right. Our management agreement was amended to include the Green Line. It's basically an extension of the park. So we have, we don't receive any additional funds to operate the Green Line. We raise 100% of the funds required to operate it. And we'll look at a similar arrangement for the new portion of the Green Line when it's built.
All right. Well, that is all the time we have. Thank you for being here. Good luck in your new job. Congratulations, if I didn't say it at the top of the show. Thank you, Bill. Next week, Paul Young, from the new head of Housing and Community Development. After that, Jim Strickland coming up in a couple of weeks on the budget. Join us again next week. Thanks. Good night.
Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the Bartlett Area Chamber of Commerce and its member Renaissance Bank, committed to supporting the growth of businesses in the greater Memphis area. Community banking with local expedited decision making. Details at renaissancebank.com. Renaissance Bank, member FDIC.